For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. Welcome back to the Blacktastic Adventure. I'm your host, Bruce Pointset. And on today's virtual exploration of the Oregon's Black diaspora, I speak with Richard Brown. Richard J. Brown is a community activist. Some years ago, he looked at a community dynamic that placed Black community members in the justice system at extremes, 36 inches and 0 on a yardstick. Feeling that the answers were to be found at 18 inches, he firmly took a position there and found others looking for some neutral ground to begin having discussions that could lead to solutions. He remained steadfast at 18. An early advocate of community policing, Richard J. Brown for over 14 years facilitated Hope and Hard Work, a weekly community meeting bringing together community members with Portland police, city, and county resources. Tirelessly, he assisted in reaching solutions to neighborhood concerns, from problems with neighbors to criminal activities. He led a very aggressive foot patrol for 18 months, 5 hours a night, 7 days a week, reducing crime in the area. A committed advocate for community policing, he is one of the original members of the Chiefs Forum, serving as the mayor's representative. His community involvement includes Albina Head Start and Albina Early Head Start, Citizens Crime Commission, and volunteers at the Blazers Boys and Girls Club. He also facilitates a weekly county reentry program, the African American program for men and women on parole or probation. He has served on advisory boards for the Northeast Community Court and the Oregon Police Corps. As an instructor with the Western Community Policing Center, he has taken the philosophy of community policing throughout the region and beyond. Serving 2 terms as the community representative to the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, where he actually sat in on trainings a couple days a week. At the end of his term, the director of DPSST finding value to his assessments of and suggestions to the training as they continue his presence at DPSST. So my conversation with Richard is fairly interesting for a couple reasons. He, as he describes him sitting firmly at 18, I would look at myself more somewhere around maybe 33, but, he has a background, came out of the military, was doing a little photography at the Observer, and it's very similar in terms of that connection between working in that sphere of journalism and using connections, then kind of building out activism from that. So just as I was talking with Richard, one, it's just great to, get wisdom, and he really stresses the idea of sustainability and, making sure you can take care of yourself and, have a plan for the long run. But then also just, navigating the different personalities and the different dynamics that arise in these spaces. So I think it's a very informative and fruitful discussion, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Check it out. We were talking right before we hit the record about just, sustainability and longevity. And, so you have a book right out now with Brian Benson, This Is Not For You, an activist journey of resistance and resilience. And, I think one thing that could be really helpful for especially a lot of young people kind of getting into this work and getting into, these activities now is just understanding what it does take not to, fighting burnout at one level, but even just, this stuff it weighs on you. And I don't think we don't get, it feels like we don't really have like very intentional conversations about how to sustain yourself and how to keep going and how to take care of yourself. So you just share some insights, from just doing this, doing a lifetime of this work.
Yeah. Well, I think being conscious of yourself and your body started for me as a youngster, preteen. When I was young, there was a, men did bodybuilding, males did bodybuilding. And there was this cartoon that was always in the back of the comic books that was advertising a system that Charles Atlas, a bodybuilder, used. And the introduction to that was a cartoon squares with these guys on the beach and this little skinny kid getting the sand kicked in his face and being mad about it. So he went home and developed this system of bulking up, you know. So because I was small and I don't want to say feisty, but wouldn't back down, I got myself in a lot of jams. So for me, Charles Atlas was the answer, I thought. Well, it wasn't, because it takes a lot of commitment. And when you're a preteen, spending a lot, you know, doing things that don't have instant results don't work, you know. So I went in with the attitude that I'm not gonna live forever, so I don't need to spend a lot of time doing this stuff. And by that time, you know, I thought I could take care of myself. And so confrontation wasn't a big issue for me. But when I got in the service, I got into this morbid habit of looking. I was in the Air Force, and they put out a newspaper, the Air Force Times. And in the Air Force Times, it's coming out weekly. In the back, they had this section of folks who have passed on. So I got into looking at that, to seeing how long folks who were in the Air Force lived after they got out or retired, whether they retired or not. You know, their deaths were always in the newspaper. So I look at the length of time they lived, and I found out that I was enlisted, that enlisted men and women, mostly men, died 10, 15, 20, maybe 25 years after they got out. Whereas officers, especially career officers who may have spent 30 years in the service, may live 30 years after they retired, 35 years, 40 years. So they're retiring at 40 years old, living 40 years, and they may or may not die. So that was a great disparity for me. And this didn't take into account race. This was just everybody. You know, they didn't give you a race. So it was just people in general. And I decided that, you know, if I want to retire and do all the things I want to do after I retire, I need to change the way I'm living, because if I retire at 37 and die at 56, I haven't spent much time, you know, living my life. So I looked at whatever it was that they were doing. So when I looked at officers, because I was always in a flight training situation, I looked at pilots mostly. And, you know, flying airplanes is a rough job. You got to be in shape. You know, you got to get your rest. You can't get up in the airplane and nod off, you know, because you're in trouble when you wake up, and if you wake up. And what I realized was they eat well, they exercise, they take care of their bodies. So, and it took, you know, I was in like 2 years before I really decided that those were the things I need to change. So I tried to temper the partying. I was never a big drinker. I always ate well. And you know, I grew up in Harlem and lived in a 6-story walk-up, and we ran up and down the steps all day. So, you know, that kept you in shape if nothing else did. You know, so I just continued those things. You know, I like sports. I play basketball. I did a little track. So, you know, those were things that that I think contributed to my longevity and relatively good health. You know, so and you know, whatever stresses were in my life, I always realized that if you walk around stressed out all the time, that's gonna, and that, you know, I don't even know how I came to that, but you know, I guess I realized that stress can be good for you. Worrying about everything can be good for you. And it wasn't my nature to worry about stuff a lot. But I saw how easy it was for people to get stressed out. So I always had things that I liked to do around me. So when stuff started getting difficult, I started doing some of the things that I like, you know, and you know, celebrating when I thought I accomplished something. So, you know, I think that the key is not to be so wed to what you're doing that you forget about the things around you. You know, think about the things that you like to do. You know, and when you open to meeting people, you learn a lot of things that you may not have learned, even thought you'd ever do. In my first few years in the military, you know, I started fishing and hunting. I never did that stuff in New York, you know, but those were fun things. You know, catching my first fish. Well, I guess I had fished before, but, you know, actually fooling a fish to take a bait. You know, when I was a kid, we'd take a straight pin and bend it and put a wad of bread on it and throw it in the water and wait till somebody a fish ran off with it. You know, this way we're trying to fool the fish into thinking what we got for on the end of the line is food for them. That was fun for me. You know, I used to do that every weekend just to get away from the activities around being in the military. You know, so you know, I found those things to keep me busy, and I really like to do.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, speaking of just, you know, kind of that ever-present stress, you know, I think that ties in well with just the fact that you've been involved in so much activism in so many areas in Portland. But before we get into that, can you just talk about what brought you to, you know, being that you traveled, been in places, you know, obviously started in New York, but then, you know, going around the world in Germany, Philippines, Texas, what made you what brought you to Portland and made you want to stay?
When I retired, I was stationed in Washington up at McCord. And I had been back in the States, a little less than a year when I retired. And my intention was always to go back to Europe. And I figured I'd stay here for a year, collect unemployment, you know, for a year and stack that. And then I could go back and, you know, kind of pick up where I left off. Two things happened. I had a friend that I had been stationed with that lived in Tacoma. So I started visiting him, and through him met my wife. So when I retired, you know, we got together and finally we got married. And the one thing that I had realized was throughout my time in the service, the place that I left was always someplace I was going back to. Because, you know, I had always felt like I'd heard people complain about going places and it just being so bad that they were glad to leave. Well, I could not envision going someplace and feeling so bad about it that I wanted to leave, or I didn't do anything until I left. So I just had the attitude that wherever I am, I'm going to enjoy it. So I enjoyed every place I was staying. Even when I was in Vietnam, I was in Saigon, and I enjoyed that. And always thought that I might want to go back at some time. But I realized that after about a year, you forget about those things, especially if you're busy enjoying where you are. You forget about the places that you had visited last. And that desire to go back kind of wanes. So I think that just having the attitude about enjoying whatever situation you're in is important. And then for me, I knew that I couldn't go to New York and live on my retirement. It would, you know, New York is just too expensive. So that was out of the picture. As much as I love New York, even to this day, you know, I'm still a New Yorker. As much time as I've been in Oregon more than I've been any place in my life, and I'm still a New Yorker, right? So, but I knew that I couldn't go back there and live without finding a job. So I stayed here and resisted getting involved in anything. And then I worked for the Observer for a while, worked. I spent time at the Observer, you know, they didn't have the money, or I didn't make a lot of, I didn't make hardly anything there. I took one picture, and a roll of film cost $3 or $4. And I got $5 for one picture. So all the running around to go wherever they wanted, I got $5 for a picture. So I wasn't working. It wasn't quite slavery, but I wasn't working. So for me, it was fun because I always wanted to be a photographer. So that gave me the ability to do that. I met a lot of people. I went to a lot of the demonstrations and the protests, and pretty soon I was just involved in them. And I put the camera down and spent more time doing those things because the people were great. The issues were important issues. And, they all had the kind of attitude that, as important as this stuff is, we got to find other things that have nothing to do with what we're doing, that's self-care. And that's how I got here, and that was my attraction to the issues, to activism.
So, and speaking of, some of the issues, one of the things I think you've been involved in as much as anything is just sort of engagement with the police and the community. Could you just talk about, one, as far as describing the role you would say you've played in that? I think I was reading on your site, you talk about like the police are at 0, communities at 36, right. You're comfortably at 18. Could you just describe that and why that's so important?
And I think this applies to any protest. When you got two people that are on opposite ends of the yardstick that I use, when there's an issue, the folks on 36 are yelling, the folks on 0 are yelling, and nobody hears. And I think it's been like that forever. And somewhere along, a couple of things happened. Tom Potter kind of brought community policing to Portland, as far as I'm concerned. But something happened before that. Richard Walker was the chief before Tom Potter was, I think, yeah. And when the gangs had come here, they had gotten so out of control that people were really at a wit's end on how to deal with it. And Walker arranged to have a meeting at Edna Robinson's house. And we went there, and I was shocked that there were no loud voices, that both sides are really trying to figure out how to get their hands around this issue. And that stuck with me for a long time. And when Potter took over, then I realized that this could be done if we found some neutral ground. The challenge is you're not going to get arguing folks to that middle ground as a group, So as an individual, it's easier to move to 18. And that's what I decided to do, to get in the middle. The cops that weren't real excited about it. And one of their issues is, how can you tell me what I'm supposed to be doing? You're not a cop. You've never been a cop. Like nobody, you have to be a cop to understand how cops feel. Well, I don't think you do. I think there are probably people that don't, but you don't have to be. Being a cop hasn't changed. The skills you need may have changed, but the reason you're a cop hasn't changed. And certainly you don't have to be a cop to talk about those things that I can talk about. You may feel that I don't have the background, and I would disagree in a lot of cases, because they always talk about the violence involved with being a cop. Well, there are some cops that go through their whole tours without chalking up a lot of hours in violence. Does it happen? That's the nature of the job. When you become a cop, if you think that you're going to go through any number of years without confrontation, then you're dreaming, you know. And so, but I took up the challenge, and the great thing about it was there were officers that were willing to walk me through that. And for me, I didn't learn anything about what they talk about as not understanding what being a cop is. Because the one thing I realized, though, that they weren't taking care of themselves physically or mentally. And those were things I could talk about. You know, Harry Jackson, Derek Foxworth, Charles Moose were the cops, the black cops that kind of just opened their arms to have somebody following them around to see what they do. And there were white cops that did the same thing. The first ride along I went on was with a white cop, and I said, well, he must be the guide, the guy that does all the good stuff, and they stuck me in his car. And you know, we sat in this car for 4 or 5 hours, had decent conversations. I saw him do nothing wrong. In fact, I think I witnessed the saving that these cops had done for a guy that I think if they hadn't intervened, the guy wouldn't be here anymore. You know, so, you know, I got to realize that, and I don't think that it was ever lost on me, that there are cops that do bad things, but it's not all of them. And they don't understand, or I think they understand now, but in the past, they didn't understand that if I don't know you, and my interaction with cops have been negative, then you're gonna have to wear that jacket. You know, and the jacket isn't the jacket you wear at the church. It's the jacket that you wear when you're out in my neighborhood. You know, so it's not about you as a person. It's about you being a part of this force that wreaks this havoc, we think, in our community. You know, a lot of them have a difficult time with that. And I think that's the biggest reason that change doesn't happen. Because instead of listening to what we say the issue is, they make the issue them. And it's not about them, it's about what you do. So if you're not willing to acknowledge that cops out there doing the wrong thing, then you're gonna always be on the defense. You're gonna always be seen as the enemy, you know. And they, you know, they have these pat things that they say, you know, when we talk about a cop beating someone up. Well, we don't know why he did it. Well, if somebody's hands are tied behind their back, handcuffed, and you're beating them up, what is it you have to understand? You know, he's not doing anything that will put you in danger. You got him tied up, you know, little things like that. And, you know, they don't want civilians to point these things out. And there comes the problem. If the cops don't recognize it as being a problem, then as far as they're concerned, there is no problem. And the great thing about cell phones is when it's on the cell phone, there's no argument. And I don't care if the guy murdered somebody. Once you got him handcuffed, once you got him in the car, any abuse is wrong. You know, and you know, they're beginning to see that these things actually have happened. You know, so some of them, you know, you still want to feel good about what you do. So I understand that in conversation, you're going to talk about the heroes. You know, but they all want to be heroes just because they got on the uniform. Now, you don't get to be a hero because you got on the uniform. You get to be a hero because you do something heroic. You know, so, you know, they've got some stuff that they've got done, but, you know, I got flack from the community. I must be a cop, you know, and that's the danger. That's the danger that at least used to accompany a job. I'm not gonna say it doesn't, because I think at any time, you know, somebody could say something about me that would turn the community against me. But I think because I've been doing it so long, that the community, whether they like it or not, they know that I'm not jeopardizing anybody in the community. You know, there are folks that they don't want to talk to the police at all. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. But if somebody, it's easier to correct problems when you're working with people who you consider the problem or who are a part of the, whatever the issue, the problem is. You know, it's easier, and it's good when you got people outside raising Cain about it, because then if you're inside, you can kind of interpret it for them. You don't have to be, you were wrong. You can say, well, this is why this is happening. And you know, there are a lot of cops that want to do things different. You know, I spend a lot of time at the police academy twice a week, you know, and I used to go down there more than that when I was on the board of directors. And, you know, there are folks that want to do the job differently. You know, we may disagree on what I see and what you see, but it doesn't stop us from talking about it. It doesn't stop us from having the discussion. And you may well show me something that substantiates what you say, but you also have to be open to hearing what I say also, you know, and there are folks that are willing to do that, you know, and I try not to jeopardize, put them in jeopardy. You know, one of the things that I learned in the Air Force, you know, the cops will want to say, this happened because I feared for my life. And I'm not in your head. No matter what I think about what you say, if you say you feared for your life, at least one, if you say it once, if every time you get in a situation you say it, then there are other problems. But my question is always going to be, what do we have to do to keep this from happening? You know, when we look at Tamir Rice, within seconds of the cops pulling up, this young man was dead. You know, why? Well, I don't want to get into that. But if we take a little time to look at the situation. Now, sometimes there isn't time. There isn't time. But when I was in the service, I was in missiles. And when the aircraft, when I was in Vietnam, when the aircraft would take off, the pilots would arm the missile as soon as the wheels were up. Well, if they didn't fire the missile, when the missile came back, it wasn't any good. Now, the only function that that aircraft has is to get a weapon where it needs to go. It's a weapon deployment system. So the aircraft, if it sees a target, will arm faster or as fast as you can as a pilot. And I used to, in the debriefings, when the pilots would come back, I'd get into this contest with them about, you know, you don't need to do this. And they'd do their paperwork. And when they were finished, thank you, Sergeant Ryan, and they'd go off. So I went to the guy that I worked for, and I told him about it, the amount of money we were wasting. And he said, Richard, when those guys take off and women take off, they are the only ones in the sky with whatever else is up there. So if they think that they're gaining any time arming that missile, don't worry about it. Just, you know, get a new one put on there. And I take that same tack with cops. I'm not going to argue that you weren't afraid. But there's got to be another way to deal with these situations other than the way we do with it if you're afraid. You know, and that's the way I get to the conversations. I'm not saying that you weren't afraid. I'm acknowledging that you may have been afraid. But what we're going to, when you're afraid, the folks that you're interacting with are the victims. You know, just like you want to go home at night, I want them to go home at night. You know, and for a lot of them, that resonates with them. They understand that, not that they could have done something different, but you know, it's possible that there may be other ways. So, right. You know, for me, that's the big thing. the community is a lot different, they don't care about whether you're afraid. If you're afraid, you shouldn't be a cop, and not everybody. But if they decide that you're selling out, then you become a bad person. And I guess I try to I don't try to hide anything. You can come to me anywhere you see me, and you can find out what's going on. You can talk to the people I'm interacting with. And I remember being on a ride along, and went into this place, and usually I know someone in there, and they would know me, so they would know what my role was. They would know that I didn't bring them here, that that for the most part I want to see what they're doing. And we went in this house, and I didn't know anybody, and I don't know whether I was scared, but I was concerned about it because I didn't recognize anybody in there. And years later, one of the guys was in there. I ran into him. I said, after avoiding him for months, I said, man, do you remember me? He said, yeah, you came into the house when the cops came in there. And I said, well, what did you think I was doing? He said, make sure they wasn't messing with us. And that made me feel so good because here's somebody I did not know. He obviously had some idea who I was, but I didn't know him. And he understood what was going on. And since then, I've got a lot of affirmation from, guys walking on the wild side that understand what I'm doing. So I haven't run into a lot of negativism because of it. And the cops think they can flip you. They can make it only happened once. We were at Cathedral Park, and the cop wanted me to take some pictures and give him. So I just turned my camera to him and started taking his picture. So he got the message. And every time I saw him, I'd point my camera at him like I was taking his picture. So they knew that, I wasn't for sale. So, when we got that out the way, then everything was cool, so. But it's work, and I can understand why people don't want to do it. But, somebody's got to be willing to be in that academy and give them some options to the way they deal with folks. And a lot of them are open to it. And a lot of the youngsters, the young officers that come through, they're really open to it because a lot of them become police because they want to change the culture. Mm-hmm. And the sad thing about it is a lot of them get to the agency and they find out that the agencies have got those dinosaurs there that don't want to change nothing.
Right.
So, the challenge, and one of the things I found out about being on the board, when community policing kind of faded, I was asked to sit on the board. I think Avell Gordley may have put my name in the hat. And I was selected to be on the board, and I opted to sit in on classes to see what they were doing. And that, the folks down there, a lot of them didn't think I should be there, much less say anything about what they're doing. But over time, my comments became welcome. And for a lot of the smarter ones down there, even though, there may have been some resistance to my saying it, I said it once and they put it into their presentation. So for me, it's not about getting credit for anything. It's about changing the culture. But, the training is another side of this stuff. When I went on there, when I got on the board, I jumped at the chance because every time something went wrong in Portland, training was the remedial action. And one of the things that I learned from the military, especially working around munitions, we didn't wait till a missile blew up to try to figure out how to prevent it. And that's what it sounded like police were doing. Well, when I went down to the academy, there were things wrong. There were things that could have been done better or needed to be done. But I don't remember seeing anything that would have changed any of the actions that I'd seen police involved in around this country, you know, and I think that's a big statement, but the training that they get in academies, probably across the country, is basic stuff. Basic stuff. That is not enough for you to go get in a car and think you're a policeman. You know, so once they leave the academy, they've got a foundation. You know, the foundation is changing, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But they still have to go back to agencies, and they have to be able to resist the cops that want to smoke them instead of choking them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've got to figure out how to do that. And sometimes it's a challenge because, you know, some of these folks, you know, being a policeman is a lifelong ambition for them, and they want to fit in. And you know, some can't understand why the community hates them. And until recently, nobody was telling them why. You know, the community was the reason it happens. If they don't like it there, why did they move there? You know, that kind of stuff. So it's straightening this stuff out is a challenge, and it's slow. You know, I used to get impatient down at the academy, and the director, when my time was up, I spent 7 years on the board, and he asked me if I would continue to come down because he valued my input. Some of the instructors have valued my input. The students invited and validated the input. And I said, you know, I don't really think I want to do that because things just happen too slow. You know, change is just too slow. And he said, you know, you can't turn the Queen Mary on a dime, you know. And he said, I want you to think about it. And next week when we get together again, let me know what you think. But what I want you to think about is what's changed since you've been here and who isn't there any longer. And when I did that, you know, change had happened, but it's like watching grass grow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you plant the seed and it grows, but it doesn't look like it. You know, so, and somebody brings it to your attention, and then you realize, oh, I got a whole lawn here now. You know, so when I get discouraged down there, that's what I do. I sit down and I think about what's changed since the last time I was pissed off. You know, so, and it keeps me down there. It keeps me down there because there are people that value my input, and the people that don't, I just keep working on them. You know, and you know, for me, the challenge is, you know, I want to have somebody else doing what I do, but I understand I don't get paid to do it. I volunteer to do it. In fact, that was the contract that we had. I will do it. You don't have to pay me, because if you pay me, then you're gonna write a job description, and then the job descriptions are gonna change, and you may decide that I'm access to your budget. You get rid of me, you hire somebody else, and then the job description that I had gets watered down. You know, so if you don't fire me, if you can't get rid of me, then I don't have to be too concerned about what I say, as long as I'm not, you know, making it a hostile environment.
You know, there's a lot there that, you know, I've been involved in kind of just in doing like respond to racism LO stuff. I've been a little bit involved in some of these police conversations. And, you know, it's just interesting listening to you talk about some of these, you know, dynamics, which again, as much as, you know, time goes by, as much as time changes, so many things remain the same. I think, you know, it's funny. I think a lot of people probably say I'm a little impatient with the police, a little hard on them sometimes. But I think some of it kind of, you know, like you said, in being able to talk with some younger officers or talk with people who seem like they're trying to do this for the right reasons, at least I know for me, I think that's part of what spurs that impatience, just because it's like between that and growing up in a, you know, predominantly white, pretty well-to-do community, and seeing like, you know, the same justifications you might use for beating someone up, for killing somebody, I see that same stuff happen here with very different, you know, results, right? So I know you have the ability to do it. I know you practice it often. So, you know, like you said, it's like you have these older people who are kind of like stuck in, well, if they don't want this to happen to them, do this type of way. But, you know, I look at it and say, okay, you wouldn't, if you, especially with like a lot of officers in Portland living in LO, it's like you wouldn't let this happen in your community if this kept happening. So, you know, you got to get there. But, you know, it's also interesting when you talk about just navigating the differences of opinion within these different sides, because it is hard. And it's so much, like you said, like if someone just sees you, you know, with the police, they're not going to ask, you know, what are you doing? They're just going to make the assumption, they're going to write the story. And, you know, obviously there are good reasons to be skeptical and scared. So it's like, you got to balance all these different things. And, you know, I think you kind of alluded to it, just being transparent, being honest, not letting, you know, because that also what you said about, you know, like police trying to turn you, that really, I think it's not exactly the same thing, but, you know, having some of these sort of behind the scenes meetings where you start picking up on even like the small tactics, like just, well, let me, you know, if we keep having the same conversation about why you did what you did, but we don't ever get to what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change this? At what point do I not think, okay, this is a tactic to just keep dragging this along? And if I say that, you're going to get offended, but we got to move something, right? Like, so, you know, yeah, that ability to navigate all of that, to navigate these differences, again, within these different communities is, you know, just the patience that has to take. And, you know, like you said, it kind of gets back to the conversation we're having before about just figuring out how to like what you enjoy in life and doing what, you know, keeps you going. Because, you know, I feel even thinking about just as we're talking right now, thinking about just some of these meetings, like I can feel it physically, you know, and that's just, we're talking about 3.5 years, not decades, right? It's
when I, you know, I think probably when I was your age, I felt the same way you do. But as you get older, you try to figure out other ways to do things. And that's kind of my disenchantment with the with what's happening today and what's happened every time there's been a some egregious behavior by the cops, in our opinion, is that they do the same thing. I mean, that any disturbance you look at in this, most of the disturbances you look at in this country were about some perceived, I'm gonna say perceived, injustice that the cops have done. Most of them. It would seem to me that because the same things keep on happening, the same kind of spark these movements, and our response to it is always the same, that we're not learning anything, you know. And I don't know whose fault that is, but that's what the book is about. Somehow there's got to be a willingness for new people to get with the people who have been there before, to figure out when you did it, what worked and what didn't work. So I don't have to do what didn't work again, because my doing what didn't work before is going to be the straw that breaks the back, because I'm gonna be mad because I did all this work and nothing happened. Well, you know, I try to tell people, when you do the same thing over and over and over again, pretty soon they understand what's going to happen. And they know how to defuse it. They know how to detract from it. They know how to make it blurred. They know how to change the narrative. So by the time the dust settles, they're working on something else. And you know, I was talking to somebody last night. You know, the conversation about police brutality is kind of going down because we're concerned about the broken up buildings downtown now. See, that's the priority. The priority isn't, were it not for the Black Lives Matter, the real Black Lives Matter folks, and the Joannes, the conversation about the cops wouldn't be happening because all the emphasis is the broken up buildings downtown, folks not making money. Well, folks over here have never made money. And they haven't made money because we got an education system that doesn't recognize that doesn't do anything about that, doesn't prepare people to do anything. We've got job situations where we don't hire Black folks for whatever reason. Home ownership. You know, when they decide to do something, we the first ones that had to leave. And they come up with and this is not the first time they come up with that. Well, we're going to do this so we can get these people that were displaced back in the community. Well, if you left because you didn't have the money to stay where you were, what's changed? Did you get another job making more money? You know, if you lived in a house and you were paying $300 a month rent over here and you had to move out to Gresham, your rent probably went up quite a bit out when you moved out there. When you talk about moving back to Portland, I hear people talking about $1,200 a month for rent. You know, if the money you make allow you to live in a $600 a month place in Gresham, how are you going to move back to Portland? Whatever program you come up with. And then you force these people to build low income housing, and they get you in there, but then they figure out a reason to get you out. And then it becomes whatever everybody else is charging for rent. You know, and I don't know how true this is. I understood that, you know, if you were able to build with the contract that said you had to have X number of low income units, if you don't do them, you're going to get fined. Well, the fines haven't been high enough because I'm sure that there are units where there was some design for low income that there's no low income in there anymore. You know, and in some cases, they never even attempted to put any in and were willing to pay whatever fines if that were the case. So you know, it's more than just the demonstrations, you know, and you know, what we're almost forced to decide what the issue is. Mm-hmm. You know, and that we let following our guts about what the problems are, we let that be taken over by something else. You know, we should have been talking about education before Floyd was shot, killed. You know, we should have been talking about jobs. You know, folks talk about there's nothing we can do about it. This is America. People can hire who they want to. You know, when Tektronix came to Portland, Vera Katz insisted, and I'm sure there was some community pressure to do that they had to have a training program for people in North Portland, Northeast Portland, Black folk, to get involved in these businesses. And they checked on it. You know, I remember going out to Tektronix to find out what the efforts had gotten us. And there weren't very many people out there. And one of the things that Tektronix said was, well, in order to get the job, you had to go out there for the training. They moved the training to PCC Cascade so that people would be available for the training. after that, I kind of didn't pay any more attention to it. But I bet you Tectonic is just as white as it was when they came here. But she did something about it. There was something that could be done. Subsequent mayors, whoever makes those deals with these folks, they haven't thought to put those things in place. And if you look at history, you'd see that at least they are willing to do it. But if you don't make them do it, they're not going to do anything. You look at all this construction going on in the community. You don't have to have any special skills to be a flagger, but they make a lot of money. And when I drive down the streets, I see men, I see women. None of them look like me. Most of them don't look like me. Why is that? Because we let them get away with it. So we need to be thoughtful about what we're asking for, and we need to stick to it. We need not bounce all over the place in these efforts, because other people will come in with their issues, and then the voices are just as loud on both sides. And we got this habit where we're so concerned about everybody else that we got to make sure people know that this is a coalition. Well, a lot of times when the smoke settles, the coalition have been able to get their issues addressed. And we're still struggling out there, forgetting what it was that brought us to the table. And that, that's an exaggeration. But, I think it speaks to what I see the issues are.
I wouldn't even say it's an exaggeration. I mean, it's
okay.
It's
so you and me then.
I mean, especially when you talk about like trades jobs, my dad's really passionate about this, so we have this conversation all the time. But again, it's kind of like it comes down to priorities and what, like you said, Vera Katz said, we're going to put this training program here, or at least, you got to put something in there. And, I've been trying to really, really embrace more of this like ecosystem thinking, even if like I don't, we use the example of like police, for example. Like I probably lean more towards, defund abolition, but I understand, even if there's other people in the community who, powerful people who don't necessarily agree with me, that doesn't mean we need to be enemies, or we got to go, we got to go to the mat over this. It's like, what do we bring to the ecosystem? Whether it's, you talk about jobs, it's like business is in there. Arts are part of the ecosystem. Education is part of the ecosystem. We can serve, sometimes I feel like a lot of this, it feels like when we talk about it, it almost feels like pie in the sky, but it does take work, but it's there. And, when we make these efforts, when we make, when you talk about, you have these templates, like obviously the New Deal, FDR's New Deal was very racist and discriminatory, but there's a template there to serve people. How we invest in things, whether police, military, like these are jobs programs. If we go into the funding, we can do that with what we prioritize. So with when we talk about just in the community keeping that perspective, and it's obviously when someone finds the answer of how do we get everyone to think about this bigger picture, though, that would be the person. But it's just you talked about the police, like everyone wants to be the hero in their story, and we always think about this in this way that's just very two-dimensional, as opposed to saying, what are the consequences? What are the, who controls what are these institutions? Like, okay, you have no interest in electoral politics, but you do understand the politician controls where this funding goes. Politician makes these laws. It's a job more so than it is, whether this person's my friend or this person is, firmly on my side or not. So how do we look at that pragmatically? How do we look at that bigger? And like I said, again, it's kind of this question we're constantly trying to figure out.
And that's part of the game. They give us all these problems and we think it's a nice juicy one. We just grab on it and they got us. Now the reason we at the table is changed, and we may or may not figure out what this new juicy thing they put in front of us is going to look like. You know, there's a lot of people are upset because the demonstrations, if they had been Black, they wouldn't have gone this far. You know, I put together another scenario that they didn't go anywhere because white people, for the first time, got to see what Black folks have been talking about for ages when they watched that guy on Floyd's neck. Black folks have been talking about this for ages. White folks got to see it. The young folks realized that they have been lied to. They've been lied to by society, by the country, by their parents, by law enforcement. They were fed a line of crap and they saw it. So they were out in force. Now, the people that were out in force were the sons and daughters of the Mac Club people, you know, the private clubs, the elite. Well, we know what happened if we start shooting them. We know what happened if we arrest them. Those kids won't be able to get a job because they got a record. So we don't do nothing. And then we wonder why it gets out of hand. You know, this would not have been a problem if all those folks downtown busting up windows would have been Black. There'd have been a different outcome, you know. And, you know, I say that to try to put a magnifying glass on what you could say about what's going on. It doesn't necessarily have to be true. I want to believe it, but I'm not trying to convince anybody else. But look at it and see how the wrong information, if I'm wrong, can be put out there because you're doing things that look like it's wrong. You know, if, when one of the ways I try to explain racist behavior about cops, that cops exhibit, and it may not be racist, but if I'm a young gang member and you stop me and say, get in the car, and you take me to the other side of town where I shouldn't be. When I get back and I start telling my friends about that, when they see a cop, they're gonna start running because they see that as racist behavior. The fact that you will stop and want me in your car for no reason, or even if you have reason, that could be the result. You know, they don't want to understand that you got to figure out better ways to do these things that you do. You know, don't stop me because you got the, because you think something, and then aggravate me until I become out of control, and then you have to put hands on me. And they know that goes on, but they don't do anything with those folks who do it. You know, now we're beginning to look at how many use of force complaints does someone have. You know, well, what we find out, well, they don't really keep track of it. You know, so we make them keep track of it. You know, and then we don't ask about it until the next thing happens that's bad. You know, so, you know, we've got to be conscientious about what it is our issues are, and we've got to have people that want to be in that lane. You know, I don't try to get in any other lane anymore. You know, for me, dealing with this cop issue is a good place for me to be. You know, for other people, they have their things. And it's not to say that everybody's got to be doing the same thing. But if you're in there and you got people's ear, that's worth many more shouting matches that you can get into outside. You know, so again, the reason for them, and you know, a lot of times when I talk to people about trying to get on the board, trying to get involved with the academy, I understand why people don't want to do it. You know, it's not like that's lost on me, but it doesn't stop me from trying, because somebody may see what I'm doing and realize that I'm not jeopardizing anybody. When I talk to them, it sounds like little things are happening. Let me get down there and see what's going on. And if you don't want to do it, fine. To be on the board, all you got to do is go to some meetings. You don't have to sit in on the classroom. But if you're at the table, you got something to say. If you're not there, nobody's listening to you. So there's a lot of finesse to it. There's a lot, when you get old, walking up and down the street is not what you want to do anymore. When we got this COVID stuff going on, 82 years old, I'm in the demographic that we need to be concerned about. I'm not going out there, mask or no mask. For different reasons, people don't want to do things, and that's all right. Do what it is you want to do, and make sure people know what you're doing, because at one point you're going to need somebody to take over where you leave off. And cultivating people, young people especially, they want to be involved. They want to be involved, and they don't know that there are limits on what you can do. They think they can go forever, and that's fine, because if you stay there, one of the things that you'll learn is how to use your time to your advantage. So if you can walk and get someplace, you walk. If you got to run, then you run. But if you can get there walking, you walk. So that when you get there, you just sit down and start your discussion. You don't have to catch your breath. Because while you're catching your breath, you're giving them something to think about. You're giving them time to think about something. I think age is got so many values, and one of the values is to understand your limitations. Even now, sometimes I don't realize mine. I'll get way over my head and stuff. But when the breathing gets hard, I come up for air. I pick up my camera, start taking pictures. So, I don't do the stamps anymore. I do other things. Again, remembering what made you feel good before you got involved. Don't forget that stuff. And default to it regularly. And for me, people tell me, well, Richard, you're supposed to be retired. I am retired. I can wake up in the morning and open one eye and look outside and decide whether I want to go outside. My schedule is always open enough that I can at least have a 15-minute talk with you. But what's on my schedule is there because I understand that no is a complete sentence. When people know you retired and they think that that your time is theirs, well, my time isn't theirs. And I don't mind you calling me. And like most folks, I don't have caller ID. So when you call me, I got to answer the phone to see who is there. And I think that's why I'm so good at saying no. Because I know that, somebody gonna want me to do something. And rather than try to find an excuse not to do it, no. And that's it. Don't have to explain nothing. And if they wanna try to convince you, if it's something you don't want to do, you say no twice. To me, being involved in this stuff is the dues for being here. And I can't be mad because everybody doesn't feel like I feel about it. But the one thing I can do is what I can do. And when I get tired of doing it, stopping is what I can do. If there's nobody there, I don't know what to tell you. Because when you leave, whatever it was that you were fighting for, if you weren't convincing enough, if you were the only reason it existed, when you leave, it's going to disappear. So you got to have a succession plan. And people have to know that if nobody steps up, all the work that was done is going to fold. And then somebody is going to come in and have to start from scratch again. Because they're not going to ask, well, what was it he did when he was here? Because we don't have no memory for that stuff if we're the opposition. Oh, he just came down here to drink coffee and eat donuts with us. You know, you get minimized. So.
Yeah. So, you know, we spent so much time talking about it. I do want to talk about the book specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you work with my literary arts wits colleague, Brian Benson. So be remiss if I didn't mention Brian.
Yeah.
And
great guy. Love
yeah.
him.
So, you know, why do you think, why was now, I guess, the right time for you to put this book out?
Well, you know, because I like talking about this stuff, because I think that's the way you get people involved. Folks, you tell me, well, you ought to write this book. You ought to write a book about this stuff. And to me, it wasn't that important. You know, so that was I didn't think there was a book. And when I decided I wanted to write something, I wanted to have a checklist. You know, so because I was frustrated with not being able to attract people to replace me, to fill that void if and when I leave. And I go to all the graduations before COVID, at least, at the academy. And there was a class that graduated, and the guy that graduated was from California. And his family came up from California to witness the graduation. And before the graduations, one of the things that I started down there was to talk to the families of the new police about how important their role is to the way their officer polices. You know, and I talk about, you know, isolating. You know, I talk about, you know, the home. No matter what they go through, there's got to be things that you all like to do together, because they're gonna go through their stuff. And the only way it gets bad is if they're allowed to just sit and sulk on it all the time, absent going on vacation, absent going to the kids' basketball game, you know, doing things that families do. So, you know, I do that, I make that talk for about 10, 15 minutes. And then that session is over. And after the graduation was over, this youngster came running over to me and he said, Mr. Brown, you know, I want to do what you do. And I thought he thought I was a cop. So I said, oh, you want to be a cop? Because I'm not a cop. He said, oh, no, I don't want to be a cop. I want to do just what you do. And I didn't know what to tell him, because I didn't know how I got to, I had never given any thought to how I got to where I am, how I got to that position. And I don't even remember what I told him, but I know that it wasn't based on any, whatever I told him wasn't based on anything. And it wasn't something that he was going to be able to say, all right, I need to start here. There was no roadmap. So after that, I'd already been getting this encouragement to tell the story. Ava Gordley was the big one. Every time she'd see me, how's the book coming? So sometimes when I see her, I try to start talking before she could ask, right? But she'd always figure out a way how to put that in there. And other people have said, you know, you need to write this stuff down. And I know that I'm not a writer, so I know that wasn't going to happen, but the youngster haunted me. That haunted me. You know, I talk about, you know, people need to be prepared to step up. And here somebody wants to step up and I don't have anything to tell him. So I started thinking about it and come to the conclusion that in the Air Force, you know, we use a lot of checklists around certain issues. Working on missiles, we got a checklist that we follow to make sure that we don't miss stuff. So I thought, well, that might be the way. And you know, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it So when I'd run into people, I'd always talk about, you know, one of the things I want to do is hoping that they'd say, oh, when you get time, we'll sit down and work that out. Nobody never stepped up, right? And, you know, I'd ask people that I knew were writers, and nobody would step. I didn't know what it took, and they probably did, but they never told me what it took to be a writer. So to write a book. So something happened on Alberta Street. Some young protesters came up to me and they were doing a survey, and I got angry about the survey. So I gave them some advice, and I gave them my card, and I guess they went to see the boss that ran, the guy who ran the organization that they were working for. And he called me up and wanted to get my ideas on what they were doing. So I went down to his office, and we sat and talked. And in the small talk, I mentioned, you know, this checklist thing, and I couldn't find anyone. And the next day, or within a couple of days, I got this call from Brian. He had talked to the guy, and we decided to meet for lunch. So we met for lunch. There was a Jordanian restaurant over on MLK and Fremont. So we met there and talked about what I wanted to do, and he listened. And we talked for 3 hours, you know. And then he said, well, I need to think about it. And, or no, he said he was 90% there or something. And before he left, we decided that it was a go. And, you know, we left there, and that began a long, long relationship. And we met for 2 or 3 hours every Friday for about 8 months, 6, 8 months. And he was gathering this information. And in the beginning, I'm wondering, well, what does this have to do with a checklist? Because we're talking about where I grew up, you know, what were the conditions where I grew up. And I just figured, you know, that was some way that he could personalize my checklist, you know. Well, time went on, and now I'm in the Air Force, and we're still talking about it. Then I'm in Portland, and we're still talking about, you know, my life. And then he said, well, I'm gonna take some time off and put this together. And again, you know, I realized then that it wasn't just a ABC checklist, 1, 2, 3 checklist. And then I started reading it, and it was kind of emotional because I was learning stuff about myself that I had forgotten, you know, and he kept putting this stuff together, and it became really much more than I wanted, and too close. You know, there were times when I'd start bawling in the restaurant, you know, just because, you know, I remembered something that happened, or it just got emotional for me a number of times. And then when it was finished, you know, it was just going in and out of my life, in and out of the activism, and it felt good. You know, it was still emotional, a lot of it. One of the things, you know, I had difficulties with my parents, and that became a real issue for me. And you know, I think the great thing about, you know, the way I treat myself is there are people around I could talk to this stuff about. I have people in my life that I can talk to about this stuff. And I did that. You know, I talked to folks about, you know, spending time doing this work, and the cops don't appreciate it and the community doesn't appreciate it, you know, and feeling bad about it. But knowing that this was surface stuff, it wasn't eating at me, but it was enough that, you know, it'd bring me to tears sometime. But I knew I was still in control. So talking to folks allowed me to get it off my chest. And a lot of times it was just acknowledgement that, oh yeah, you went through it, but you handled it, you know. So, but we began reading it, and it was just fun to read, you know, and when we were finished, you know, we went through it. We had some things that needed to be changed, and we got them changed. And we just, you know, he's from Wisconsin, and I think, you know, out in the woods, Wisconsin. And so his perspective on things are a lot different than mine. But we go to movies together, we go to talks together, just so he could hear what other Black folks had to say on subjects that we talked about. And the interesting thing was, we went to see I'm Not Your Negro by James Baldwin. And James Baldwin went to the same elementary school I went to, you know, so he lived in the neighborhood I lived in. So when we went to see it, Brian said, man, he said exactly what you said. You know, so, you know, for me, when people are talking, they may not know each other, Black folks especially. They may not know each other. They may never talk to each other. You could talk to them individually, and you're gonna find some common threads that pass through all of their lives. And Brian was able to see that. That the fact that I'm from New York, 15, 20 years after James Baldwin was there, and we got these same threads going through it, that we could look at Get Out. We could look at Get Out, mm-hmm. and see that even in this movie, we see some things that I may have talked about. You know, we can see that we're closer as a people than we think we are. You know, so it becomes easier, I think, to talk about stuff and to when you head someplace, to give it some validity. You know, so that happened a lot. And we just, you know, got a great relationship. You know, there were some rough spots and we had to work through those, but we did it. And I was kind of anxious because, you know, we were talking, and since I'm only writing a checklist, I don't expect to read some of these things that I said, right? And then I have to read them, and they're in there, and they make sense being in there. And I guess one of the things that I've, since the book went out, less than a month has been out, when people have read it, they pick up on that. You know, they see the connection about things that happened to me in my life and how I deal with stuff in my activism. You know, one of the biggest things that I realized, you know, you don't recognize exactly why you do some of the things you do. I've got my mother's yearbook, and growing up, you know, we were not kind of family to say, I love you and this kind of stuff, that kind of stuff. And I was reading the back cover of her book that someone had written like half of the back page of about my mother. And it talked about her activism. It talked about her feeling about Black folks. It talked about all of this stuff that if you take her name off the top of it and take the year off the bottom, they're talking about me. And it was written in 1938, right? Before I was born, and it's about my mother. And it became obvious where this drive to do the stuff that I do came from, you know. And then I start looking at other things that that I can attribute to my parents that I do now. And you know, some of the things piss me off. Like I can find myself talking to a youngster and say something that my mother or father told me, and I'm mad because when they told me, I thought they didn't know what they were talking about. You know, now here I am telling another young person. So that used to make me mad. Now when it happens, I just laugh, you know, because I thought my parents were the dumbest parents in the world. and that the older I got, the smarter they got. You know, so I encourage young folks to pay attention. You know, at least listen, because you never know when what they have said is going to make some sense to you. You know, and I never got to tell them how much I value those things today. You know, so that's an emotional thing for me, missing telling them. But in my, I won't say depression, but in my down feelings, one of the people I can talk to is my brother. He's a year younger than I am. And I told him how I was feeling about that. And he said, Richard, don't worry about mom and dad. They had good eyes. They could see in the dark, right? And it was like a weight being lifted off my shoulder when he told me that. And that's the only acknowledgement I have in the book. And part of that's because, again, there are not many people that I've met and spent any time with that haven't imparted some of who they are to who I am. So forgot what the question was. Did I answer the question?
Oh, yeah. It's just asking about kind of like the process of writing the book.
Yeah, the book.
Yeah, but I think that,
yeah,
no, I think that's perfect. I think that's kind of that's a great place, I think, to kind of like cut off this part. I want to keep you on for a little sure. bonus discussion for the patrons, but Richard Brown, thank you again so much just for the wisdom, the insights, you know, just perspective on so much of this. Because, you know, like you said, it feels like sometimes we go around in these circles, and it's important to kind of just like take, you know, pull out a little bit and just look at, you know, the bigger picture, look at, you know, what's happened before, what can we learn, how can we improve, you know, on just the work we're doing and the templates that have been laid out for us, and how can we, you know, learn from those who've been there before us and are still in it. So I just want to thank you again. And like I said, we'll be having a little bonus discussion in a little bit for the patrons. So Richard Brown, thank you again.
Let me say, I appreciate you willing to sit down and talk about this stuff. And all it does is it makes talking to young people important. You know, I don't know if you know Sienna. She's the woman who kind of facilitated the other discussions. And Mac Smith.
I know Mac.
Okay. When I talk to older people, they ask me a question. They have the answer. They know the answer they want. So a lot of times they ask me a question expecting me to ditto what they said. But when I talk to youngsters, the questions that I hear are questions that they have about what they're doing, about what their life is like, the struggles that they're having in doing what they want. And that's powerful to me. That's powerful to me. That's why I always have time to talk to young folks, you know, because they're looking for answers. You know, they're not looking, although, you know, doing whatever you do with this stuff is important. The questions you ask are questions that you have, not questions that you are asking for all of Portland, you know, or to get to be able to say, oh, I was on the right track. You know, it's about your struggles. It's about problems that you see, that faults that you see in your peers and in you. So I really appreciate the opportunities to have these discussions. And, you know, for most folks, like you're gonna do something with this. For most folks, most youngsters, this may be too long to sit down, you know. And this is another story. I did a workshop at Jefferson High School on, I'm a Smithsonian community scholar. And when I came back, one of my challenges, one of the things that I took on was getting young folks to start doing genealogy stuff on their families. So I went to Jeff, and I taught them how to use cameras, taught them how to use tape recorders, and gave them each a camera and tape recorder, and challenged them to go find someone in their family or in their neighborhood that was a mature citizen to talk to. So they went home. This was on a Thursday, I think, Wednesday or Thursday. So one of the youngsters didn't come back. So, you know, where's so-and-so? Well, the teacher said that he was ill. So I forgot about it. So he came back. And when he came back, he had taken one picture of his grandmother, of his grand aunt, and he did a tape recording. And in this process, he wanted to do it, but his friends came by and they wanted to play basketball, right? So he said, I guess he told him he'd meet him there, and he figured that he'd ask her one question and he'd be able to leave. Well, he asked her one question and they did the whole tape. One question, and she talked and didn't stop, you know? And that's one of the things that I tell people about older people. They've got stories. You just need to take the time to listen to them. And for whatever reason, he just let her talk. And when he came the next day, he only had this one picture, and I think it was of his cat. So I said, listen, here's another roll of film. I want you to go home, and I just want you to take this whole roll of pictures of your great aunt. He took the film, went home, and then didn't come back the next day. It was the weekend. He didn't come back until that Monday. Friday, he was sick. He didn't come back till Monday. So I said, well, I'm glad you're feeling better. He said, what are you talking about? I said, oh, the teacher told me you weren't here Friday because you were sick. He said, no, I didn't come in because when I got home Friday evening, my great aunt was in the hospital and she died. And I made a point to show how important that 45-minute tape he had was. You know, and I used to tell that story all the time of how important it is to get to know the old folks in your family and to validate them, you know, to make them feel important. Because most old folk think that they don't have a story. You know, when I was in the House of Umoja, we used to, on Fridays, we'd get the grandparent of one of the youngsters in the House of Umoja to come in and talk about what it was growing up wherever they were, you know. And we'd have to prime them. We had to give them some questions to ask. But they would do it, and these folks would come in and they tell these stories. And these youngsters, they listened. You know, you don't know how it impacts their lives because it may not have impacted their lives yet. But they've got this information now. You know, so they've got to be able to, hear the stories from folks that are their grandparents that grew up in Portland, that grew up wherever they grew up in the South. They grew up somewhere else, you know, so you know, those things, again, go along with your ability to sit down here and ask these questions and be patient enough to go through all of the crap that I want to talk about. So I appreciate that.